Welcome. I think this is episode 4 of our suspension basics, and we're going to get a little advanced in tonight's edition. Bump steer was listed first because it worked better with my joke for the title. So we're covering bump steer and Ackerman tonight. These are a little bit more advanced things, but they are important to know about for racing and even on the street. For those of you who might tune in on the old YouTube, we are dual casting again tonight, trying to see how that works. Trying to build up the YouTube a little bit. So, what is up, Brandon and Marvin? So, as always, the only thing I ask that you do is hit the like button. That's it. That's all I ask you to do is hit the like button. So, bump steer and Ackerman are neither thing is easy to adjust on a front wheel drive car with stock suspension, but they can explain why your car might be doing something a little bit goofy. So that's the main reason why I tell people that they need to kind of check them out. Now tonight we are going to cover them, but I am going to give a very rough overview. So we won't really get into like math. We're going to use exaggerated angles and things like that. So the idea is to give you the basic concept of bump steer and Ackerman, so that you guys can run with it if you want to. So, what's up, Kip? Michael? So, all right, let's jump right into it. Ackerman. Ackerman was named after somebody Ackerman who kind of discovered this. So we've talked about this a little bit with our toe episode. If you're going to go around a corner, your inside tire and your outside tire, they actually have two different paths that they need to travel. So if you turn both of these wheels the same amount, you are going to run into one of them isn't going to be along the arc that it needs to. So Ackerman is built into the steering knuckles and the angles of the tie rods so that your tires turn differently as you start to turn it. Now, you can use this for an advantage to make the car handle better, or you can use it in the case of most of our OE manufacturers to actually slow the car down. And it might seem might seem a little bit weird that they would do that. But as we talked about in our tow episode, the manufacturers of these cars, my car is a Dodge Neon. The intended market for them was people who needed a cheap car. And the majority of people who drive cheap cars on the road have no idea how to drive one at the limit. So a front wheel drive car at the limit is easier to drive if it just pushes. So, if it understeers. When you try to go around a corner too fast and you turn the wheel, it doesn't turn. So they want that to happen because if you hit the brakes, if you slow down, the car will bite and it'll turn. Most people know how to hit the brakes, and especially with anti-lock brakes where the tires are not locking, so they just slide anyway, they can roll a little bit. So as soon as it gets low enough speed, they're going to grab and they're going to go. One easy way to do that is to run some toe in so that the tires don't actually point around the corner. They're going to end up more this. All right, we got to exaggerate this a little more. But they're going to end up something like this. It just causes the car to push because these are going to fight each other pretty hard. Okay. Now, Ackerman can be fairly easily measured. How much you have, you measure the toe statically, you turn the wheels, and you measure it again. Now, if you had turn plates, you could measure it every 5 degrees and see what it does. You could get fancy like that. What I tend to do is I sit in the car and I turn the wheel roughly how I would during a race and measure it there. So really easy to measure. Just however you measure toe is how you're going to measure your Ackerman. Now, how do they achieve this? How do they make these turn at different rates? Well, if we are looking overhead, okay, you have your ball joint, and then you'll have your outer tie rod. So you'll have a steering arm, kind of looks like this. This is where your wheel will be, okay? Your lower control arm is going to come this way, something to this effect, okay? The upper pivot point doesn't matter for the sake of this demonstration right now, so keep that in mind for a second, okay? Your tie rod comes in, and then you have your inner tie rod, which goes to your steering rack. By changing the distance here, we can change the rate as to which a car turns, how fast it turns, but we can also change Ackerman just a little bit. Okay. My brain just went blank for a second. I hate having ADHD sometimes because the meds have wore off. For Ackerman to not be exaggerated, I am not joking. My mind just went completely blank. Like, Kyle Jenks. I will check my messages. And what's up, Doug? Man, literally just went. Okay. Bump steers part of this. Okay. I'm going to take a step back. We're going to talk about bump steer just for a moment until that comes back to me. Okay. I apologize for that. I really do. I don't feel the smartest right now. Bump steer is really easy. Bump steer is the amount your wheel turns in its range of motion. Okay. So if this is your tire, looking down, and then if we look at it from the side, so you've got your control arm, got your knuckle with your tire. Okay. As your control arm moves up, it'll be the difference as to whether your tire toes in or toes out. Okay. Almost all cars are going to bump steer one way or another. Okay. Now, bump steer is a result of angles not being proper. Okay. So if we have our lower control arm and we're looking at it from the side, okay, if we have our lower control arm pivot point, our ball joint pivot point, okay, and if we wanted perfect bump steer, okay, our tie rod would be the exact same length and it would be parallel, okay, to our lower control arm. The reason being, as that control arm moves up and down, okay, if you have a length of anything, if this point stays the same and this point moves, it actually is going to go in a circle. Okay. So as it travels up, it's going to come in. As it travels down, it's going to come in. So you want these to be parallel so that as they go up and as they go down, they make the same arc. Fairly simple. Most front-wheel drive cars, they don't do this. They don't have the space to do it, and they don't care that much. As long as the car doesn't do anything really weird, they don't care that much. So what happens a lot of times is you will have one of two things. You'll have your lower control arm pivot point, ball joint, and then you will have your steering rack be short, and your distance from steering arm down to ball joint will be greater. So might be hard to see, but that angle means that they're in different parts of the arc. So this one is already almost flat. This one is still way out. So as it comes up, this one is going to continue to come out before it comes in, whereas this one's going to start coming in almost immediately. That is going to cause steering, because as your tie rod, and this might be harder to think about because as you turn, you're not really thinking that these are like static. But once you hit a point where they turn and everything's moving and it can continue to move up and down, even while you're turning this and making it go this direction, if it is parallel, it is going to keep essentially no bump steer. So even if we shift that out here because we've turned, it's still going through the same arc. So this stuff applies whether you're turning or just cycling the wheel up and down. Now, this is really easy to measure, but kind of difficult to do well. The ability to measure this is just simply running the suspension up and down and being able to measure toe as you do it. Now, bump steer can be a fine measurement. It can be very minute, like a 16th at most, right? Is it something you have to worry about? No, probably not, but it is something to be aware of, okay? The typical setup is going to have, hey, I actually made that look fairly nice. Gonna have a toe plate bolted to your hub. You're gonna have a jack that's underneath your control arm, and then you're gonna have a dial indicator here, a dial indicator here, and as you run that through its motion, that plate will move back and forth. Most of these bump steer checkers are not made for like a 4x100 or a 5x100 pattern. You 114.3 guys, it's a 4.5, so you can find some that fit it. But you can do this if you drill your own pattern into a set of toe plates. I don't know where ours are. That's what I've done. I have a set of toe plates somewhere that has my bolt pattern in it. That way we can measure bump steer, okay? Now, one other thing to consider is that the angles, when you look at it, say from the front, we're going to say that these are parallel, okay? Even if we're looking at it from the front, if our control arm and our tie rod are parallel, we might still have some bump steer. And the reason for that, actually, I stand corrected. That's where the Ackerman comes into play. How you can help adjust Ackerman. Okay. If we are looking from the top down, if we have our control arm come down here, ball joint, and our tie rod comes here and comes into our point here, again, we're looking from the top. So if we look from the front, it might be parallel, right? But they might look from the top, they might have an angle there. This, as it goes through the arc, is going to still have a different arc than that one, okay? So you can have different measurements based on if your steering rack is forward or backwards, along with being above or below, like it needs to go higher or lower. So that's why this isn't something that's easy to change. It isn't something that most racers are going to worry about, okay? However, it is something to be aware of, because if you have a steering knuckle where the tie rod mounting point bends, actually, one moment, I should have grabbed this before we started. I have a steering knuckle over here I can actually use as a demonstration. Oh. I completely forgot we had one of these in the shop. So this is a Dodge Neon right front spindle. Yep. Okay. Ball joint, tie rod, right? If we're looking at it from the side, the important thing to remember is the ball joint pivot is actually down here. And on a neon, the tie rod goes above it. So the pivot point's up here, pivot point's down here. If I bend this arm, get into a wreck, and it happens to bend down, I have now changed the angle of my tie rod. So I could make it worse or I could make it better. We actually, way back in the day, had a steering knuckle. I got in, I bumped a guy, and the car absolutely came to life. And I mean, you could look at the lap times, and I picked up, I think, 3/10. Like I probably should have broke out. It was that much faster. Looked it all over. Toe was still the same. Like we couldn't find anything that was different. Race the second week was still fast. All right, cool. The second week, decided to do a little more thorough inspection and realize that that steering arm was bent, and I don't remember up or down. Actually, I think it was bent down and like back a little bit slightly. I still don't know how the toe didn't change. Or maybe the toe did change. That's not the important part. But I see it, and I go, oh man, that one's bent pretty bad. Like, yeah, we probably ought to swap that out. So we did exactly that. Swapped it out. Went out that night, and the car was garbage. I was 3/10 slower, 2/10 slower. Car just didn't seem to handle right. So we messed around with it a little bit, adjusted this, adjusted that, kind of got it back. Still didn't handle quite the same. Got thinking, I wonder if that bent spindle made it better. So we put it back on, picked the speed back up. Holy crap. Now, this was all the way back in like 2010. Okay. Quite a few years ago. I didn't know quite as much. We didn't measure it in any capability at all. Ran it another 1 or 2 weeks, got hit in the wheel again, and the car completely went away. So I'm thinking bent a tie rod or something. We continued to bend that steering arm. So it went even farther, and it went way past where it should be, and absolutely just destroyed everything. Like it didn't handle at all. Somehow we didn't throw that spindle away. We didn't get rid of it. And so we swapped it out. We ended up putting on my dad's car like the next year because we broke his or needed a new one. Swapped it on, and he immediately remembered the year before because the car was so bad. We had to drive back to the shop, get a different spindle because we had to take that one out. It was that bad. Okay. But what it was because the tie rod angles had changed. I personally believe that it had changed the Ackerman a little bit too because it moved it in this direction, which we're going to get back to Ackerman in a second. But I think it had moved it in that direction and that direction. But if I hadn't realized that that was bent and that points had moved, we still would have had absolutely no idea why it was that much faster, why it was all of a sudden worse. And just glancing at it, you couldn't really tell. What actually caught our eye was that these are parallel. So they should be roughly the same. So it was bent, and that's what tipped me off was that it was a little bit of a weird angle. Otherwise, we wouldn't have known why it changed. So that's why it's important for you guys to know that this exists, because it could explain if the car gets way better or way worse with no other apparent damage. Okay. What's up, Delaney? All right. Ackerman. I think we're back. Okay. I think. Some of the things that can change Ackerman. So ball joint, tie rod, control arm, actually tie rod, ball joint. Going to be easier for my brain to process this way. Okay. Some of the things that can change Ackerman are having these be at more of an angle, less of an angle. Okay. The other thing that can change it is the distance from here to here. So tie rod, ball joint, arms going this way. We're looking from the top. Okay. If I have one arm that has a steering lever that's this long, and I have another knuckle which only has the ball joint moved in this far and the steering arm is that short, they're going to turn at different rates. Okay. Because if I have a lever that's this long, or I have a lever that's this long, and I move the top pivot point the same amount. If I move this one and I move this one, but say I only move them like a quarter of an inch, right? That longer lever is going to have less of an angle change than a shorter lever because that same distance traveled. This goes back to the whole right angle triangle thing. You know, if you increase one leg, it'll get, you know. So the longer this arm is, the more input it takes to turn the wheel, same amount. So if you have one arm that's a little longer, one arm that's a little shorter, and what I'm talking about with that again is if you are looking at it from here to here, okay? It doesn't matter the pivot points are down here or up here. From this direction, okay, the only thing that matters is the length of here to here. So if I make this distance longer, this knuckle is going to turn less with the same amount of input. If I make it way shorter, it's going to turn a lot more. This is actually where like a tighter turning car comes into place. Like if you've ever driven a street car that like you turn the wheel and it just like you only got to turn the quarter turn and it'll turn 90 degrees. Or if you've ever driven like a school bus or a big truck or a van or something where you got to turn the wheel feels like a mile to get it to actually turn. You have more leverage with that longer arm, but it doesn't turn as fast. So it doesn't matter how quick the ratio of the rack is or anything like that, because the distance traveled will always be the same. It's just traveling the tie rods versus traveling just the steering rack, okay? So Ackerman can be based off this, right? Which is primarily, that distance is going to primarily be the source of Ackerman in our cars. Now, one other way to get bump steer, as I remember here, is in a perfect world, we're going to have the same length arms, okay? But what usually happens in our case is that the steering rack is going to come out here or be way in here, and our tie rod is only going to come in a little bit. So if we have a shorter arm here, or we have a way longer arm than this, that will also have a different arc. Because the arc of this and the arc of this is just the radius of a circle. So if you have a longer radius, it's a bigger circle, shorter radius, shorter circle. So if you have your steering rack is significantly shorter than the pivot points of your steering or of your control arms. So control arm pivot points, steering rack pivot points. If this distance right here is not the same distance from your tie rod mounting point to your ball joint, if it's less than this or more than that, that will have an effect on your bump steer as well. Okay. So these are things that this you actually could change a little bit fairly easily. Some of you could, some of you couldn't. If we have our steering rack is too narrow, we could just make it longer. Okay. So you could make a spacer that goes inside of there or, you know, something to that effect, right? Kind of a way to change it, right? So the length of your, and this is why when we talk about adjusting toe, this is another thing that comes into play when you are adjusting whichever side. Because if my steering rack is basically the same length here to here, and my tie rods, right? But if I make one tie rod an extra inch, right? And I shift that rack over that inch, and this one is much shorter, that is going to really change my steering. That'll change the geometry. So you want to try to have that centered up a little bit so that you don't have these different length arms. What's up, Curtis? It's okay, you're late. you know, the only thing you missed was me short circuiting and forgetting some stuff. So that's pretty much it. I appreciate the love though, guys. I do. It's not really depression. It's just it's been a long day, and yeah, not really anxiety. It's just the ADHD, and it's been a long day. Just got sidetracked. So because I try to like cram session all of this stuff just to make sure that I am remembering properly. And I cram sessioned, and then it's been an hour and a half or 2 hours. So some of the stuff got a little bit jumbled around. Um, is there any questions on anything that we've talked about thus far? Um, so the reason why I tell you guys that it can be important for the length of the arms, yeah, from here to here, different makes and models will have different lengths of that based on the trim level of the car. PT Cruisers are a good example of this. The steering knuckles that they have a much larger pad up here, and they have like 4 different locations for the holes, depending on the wheels and depending on if it was a turbo model or not. For whatever reason, the turbo models had the longest arms, they turned the hardest. If you had a 15-inch steel wheel, it had the shortest. So you theoretically could go and find the shortest ratio, put it on both sides, the car will turn a little quicker. Or, probably shouldn't say this because, some tech guys are probably going to figure this out, never had before. If that hole isn't on the same location on both sides of the car, if say one of these was a little longer and one of them was a little shorter, it could change the Ackerman for you. Could be better, could be worse, depending on if you put them on the right side, on the correct side or not. So, toe out. How far is too far? David's been away for a few months. Any work on the yellow cabbie? No, not yet. Not quite yet. Soon. Miss about what? So wouldn't camber play a role though to get these points to the same length? So camber can play a role. Excuse me. Camber can play a role in this. Okay. The important basic thing to remember with all of this is you want the arms to be as parallel as possible in all directions. Okay. So the reason that camber could change that is because if our pivot point is here and our pivot point is here, if I camber this in, my pivot point here has moved in, my pivot point here has moved out. So if that link, if I pivot that in, if I keep that link the same length, but I simply move it, it should follow the same arc and it should still be okay, right? However, if I camber it in, I move this pivot point, but I keep my rack centered and I make this link shorter than I do the other side, then I can run into problems by introducing some of that movement. Now, this is also one, if you guys are going to be measuring this stuff, if you're going to be measuring bump steer and Ackerman and all that, change the length of your tie rods to see what effect they have on the car. You might discover that if you lengthen out and you have a longer tie rod on one side versus the other, it might bump steer differently in an advantageous way. It might toe in, toe out, how you want it to. Okay. So if you're checking that, mess with some stuff, figure it out. The other thing that you can do too, if you have like a Neon, this has a ball joint that is a solid stud, it's not tapered. You can also mess with that to find out control arm differences, okay? Because you can loosen that stud and run it all the way down to where it's just barely in there, tighten it up, and measure it, and you've changed the pivot point to down lower. Do the opposite, run it in as far as it'll go, tighten it up, and you can measure that distance, that difference, and you can actually see whether it gets better or worse. How Racing makes a ball joint for the Dodge Neon. Kind of cool to say, I actually tested the prototypes. I got to run them for a whole year before they were actually introduced for the public. I was not responsible for that. Greg Calhoun. He showed up and said, hey, try these out. And I said, okay. But they make an extended stud. Because on a Dodge Neon, the problem that we face is that our tie rod and our pivot point are much closer together than our ball joint and our tie rod. That is one way that we suffer. Actually, I think I have that opposite. But our angles are not the same. But our control arm angles as well, if we lower the car too much, our control arm angles go uphill, and you do not want that. So the extended ball joint moves that arm down, opens that distance up a little bit, okay? So your make and model might have, if you run a Honda, there's a good chance you got an aftermarket ball joint that might run a longer one. The tie rod, depending on the tie rod that you have and depending on the direction you need to go. Okay, ours are on a Neon, it is too far apart and too close at the body. One thing that you might be able to do is if you get a reamer, you could actually ream that taper and pull the ball jar tie rod down in. Or there are things you can do called a flip kit. So Volkswagens are really popular for this because they slam them on the ground. And basically your steering, your tie rod end, most vehicles, your tie rod has a taper to it, okay? You'll have your ball joint stud up here with your pivot point, and then it comes through, and this is the threaded part where the nut goes, okay? But that taper sits against a taper in the arm. Well, if I needed that pivot point lower, I can either take that taper and make it wider so it'll sit farther down in, or if I need to move an extreme, the VW guys actually run like 2 or 3 inch ball joint extenders. That way they can really slam them to the ground. But what they do is you can do it one of two ways. You can drill it out so it's round, and then to make an insert that actually goes in and will give you your taper upside down. And then you run your tie rod down here. Okay. So you can actually flip your tie rod over to under. And the issue with that is a huge swing. In the case of the Neon, the ball joint studs are only a 1/2 inch longer. If I was to do a flip like this, I would move my tie rod like 3.5 inches, roughly. Huge swing, okay? Huge swing, too much, right? And I'll be as honest with you guys as I can be. You can believe me or not. I run the Howe extended ball joints. I do not have any deeper ream. I do not have any special tie rods. It just fits in the knuckles. I have not done anything as far as that goes. So I do run the extended ball joints, but I have not messed with the tie rods in moving them at all. So those are a couple of ways that you could adjust that angle on the outside. Another thing that you can do, I have experimented with this in the past. I didn't see good results, and it put the steering rack in just too close to the transmission. But if you have your pivot point for your control arm and you have your pivot point for your steering rack for your tie rod. So if you have your steering rack that comes out and your ball joint attaches here and comes out, and we're just going to say that that goes inside of here, and then you have your mount here, which bolts to your K-member, okay? If you were to actually take, so like in the case of a Neon, this distance is too shallow. So what I have experimented with is putting a spacer right here and moving the entire rack up. Like I said, in my case, I did not see a difference. I couldn't really see it with the toe plates that we had, and on track, it didn't really do anything. And I had it spaced up, I think 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 inch. I tried both. What it did do was take the steering rack and put it into the transmission. So I don't have any spacers in there now. My rack is in the factory location. But I have experimented with this in the past, and it might be something that I revisit here on the new car just to test stuff out. So, yeah. Doug, we already talked about camber. Do they make offset ball joints for Neon? Yes, the Howe racing ones. And then I keep my driver's side tie rod shorter, and I run a lot of camber, and makes my toe appear way worse than it actually is. What do you mean, Curtis? Makes it look way worse than it is. Your dynamic toe, or your Ackerman, like when you're turned, or just sitting like sitting and looking at it. So I don't think having a 2-inch ball joint would be safe. That's a huge load at a mounting area. It all depends on the material that it's made out of, Michael. The way that the VW ones work, so the VW ones are a little bit like the Neon, where they're solid through and they pinch. The adapters that they make actually have a large surface that mates up against the bottom of the knuckle. And then it actually has a slit in it, and the extender comes down out of the knuckle, goes up in, right? You get the idea. So basically the same thing there, but this actually butts up against and helps go there. But it's strong. It's just the material that it's made out of. You might be surprised at the side loads that you get. It seems like it's a lot, and it is a lot. But if it's steady, it isn't too terrible. One thing to keep in mind is like your late models and stuff. If you ever look at them, you'll see guys with 3-inch ball joints in a late model, right? They're running just as high or higher side forces than we are. They run faster speeds, more weight, bigger tires, and they'll have huge, long, extended ball joints as well. So, yeah. Yeah, nope, it is not an empty space in between. So, and then how much toe is too much toe? So this one does come into play. Okay. So this is what Kyle's asking. This is part of our toe episode. I tell people on my Neon, I run 9/16 of toe out. I always measure in 16ths. I talk in 16ths. Level of or order of accuracy. Okay. The reason I run 9/16 is because in the center of the corner, I have 0 toe, or maybe a 16th of a toe out. Because the Ackerman on my car, much like all other front wheel drives, is actively trying to toe my tires in as they go around the corner. So by going down the straightaway with high static toe, when I go into the center of the corner, dynamically, because of my Ackerman, I don't have that much toe. The easiest way to figure out how much toe you need is to start with something, go out and run, come in, adjust the toe, take a big swing at it just so that you can hone it in quickly. Move it, 4/16, 5/16 of an inch, toe it in or toe it out. If the car gets better, do it again. If the car gets worse, do half as much. If that doesn't make it better, go the opposite direction. Go back to 0, go 5/16 the other direction. I can tell you that towing out is the way that you want to go. If you tow it in, car's going to push. It just happens. So too much tow is when your car starts to slow down. That's how. And some of you are going to do it. I get this argument every time. Well, I don't want it to have all that drag going down the straightaway because it's too much drag. It drags. It scrubs. You're not wrong. My car goes down the straightaway with the front tires like that, heading in this direction, right? They go down the straightaway like that. However, I lose less going down the straightaway with my tires towed out a little bit compared to what I gain in the corners. If I tow closer to say 2 or 3/16, I go a couple tenths slower every time for the past almost 15 years. Every time I take tow out of the car, whether it's out of a Neon or my old Daytonas, every time I try to run less tow, the car pushes worse, I lose time. My sweet spot is somewhere between 8 and 10/16. I aim for 9, but if it hits 8 or it hits 10, then it doesn't go any slower. So I do that way. I've got a little bit of leeway. So if we're not quite accurate on reading it or anything like that, there's a little bit of play. We're still in that range. So, do you do both sides or one side? Doug, go back and watch the toe one again. We talk about which side to adjust and why. What's up, Will? You got that thing ready for dirt? Toe on the right side, so when in the corner, it comes to straight, drive off the with the steering and not drifting. Michael, nope, doesn't matter. Does not matter. And here's why. If my front wheels are like this, so if I tow my left front out a whole bunch, when I go down the straightaway, these will even out and look like that every single time. You are not adjusting one side. You are adjusting one side that gets divided in half and gave to the other side as well. Every single time this turns into that, it's physics. There's no argument against it. This is what happens. It is why if you get an alignment done on your vehicle and they don't have the steering wheel centered, you could turn that steering wheel and you could have one tire straight and the other tire towed right out. And as you start rolling, your steering wheel turns and you go straight. Because if these tires are connected, but they move, they are going to do this every single time. They will find equilibrium. So it does not, there is no performance benefit unless your links are too long or too short to towing one side versus the other, because they will find equilibrium. I adjust the right front because I don't have to jack the car up to adjust the right front. I have to jack the car up to adjust the left front. That's why I adjust the right front. That's the only reason I adjust the right front. So yeah. And Curtis says on dirt, I try to keep it around 3/8, 6/16. And then cool. I'm glad you got it done, Will. Bill bumped my toe in. Car got so bad I had to park it. It's a big deal. It absolutely is. Now, you might find on your car that 3/16, 6/16, 105/16, the number is going to change, and it different makes, different models have different amounts of Ackerman. The dynamic toe the dynamic toe is going to be different. And you could have one ball joint that has a little bit different length, or one tie rod has a little bit different length. You can have some of these variables that could be different from car to car and change that steering. So that's why you need to figure out what you want on your car. I can tell you on a Neon, the Ackerman is roughly 9/16 of toe in the center of the corner. So measure yours, see what it is. Whatever your Ackerman is, getting the center of the corner, getting the tires to near zero toe or towed out slightly will make you faster, because your dominant tire is your right front. So if this is our corner, your dominant tire is the right front because it's where all the weight is, not because it drives off from, no, it's because that's where the weight is, okay? So this tire is going to dictate where the car goes. So if your left front is pointed in this direction, so you're towed out a little bit, it is going to be scrubbing just a little bit, but it's going to actually be trying to steer you in. If you have it the opposite way, where you have it towed in, it is going to have a force going in this direction instead of this direction, and it will push you that way. Rear-wheel drive cars, spread the tires out, just the drag force on the tires. Front-wheel drive cars on the gas, tow the car in, just all the compliance between two inners, two outers, a steering rack, control arm bushings, everything that could possibly move, all that compliance. When the tires bite and it drives, it tows in, okay? So you have to fight that plus your Ackerman, which is trying to tow the car in. So you want to try to have it tow out a little bit. Now, if this setup on your car is faster, awesome. Your driving style, your setup, because if you go in a corner and you bury that right front and you lift the left rear 9 inches in the air, 25 inches in the air, that left front might actually matter. if you have a car that like, if you do that on dirt where you're just bit in and the rear of the tires that high in the air, let the toe on the left front probably doesn't matter as much. If you're on pavement and you've got the car low and flat where the left front has a ton of weight in it and a ton of bite in it, that tire where it's pointed is going to dictate where you go. Okay. So I can't tell you what the magic number is. You do have to experiment. So I will try, Will. Shoot me a message. I am going to be in the subscriber group after this for a few minutes. Sean went from 1/4 to 5/8. So Sean went from 4/16 to 10/16. That's probably like the ADHD part of my brain that I always convert it. So this is applied to the ball joints with equal movement throughout the steering. Can you ask that again a little bit different, Michael? I don't understand what you're trying to ask. So does this apply to the ball joints too with equal movement throughout the steering? Chad bumped his toe so bad it broke a nail one time. What do I run when I run dirt? When I run dirt, I do it poorly. So my dirt setup is not one to be emulated. The best I've ever done on dirt was 5th. I got lapped. It was my first race ever on dirt, and the right rear strut broke loose, and so it was going boop, 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 and I could not keep the rear end of that car underneath me at all. It wouldn't have mattered what I had for toe at all. So I have not done well on dirt. I'm not going to pretend that I have. So I don't know. Like, we usually just, like, the neon that I've ran a couple times, we set it the same at pavement, 9/16. The cabbie, when I ran it down at Bristol, I asked Brad Chandler what I should run because it was their car. So, hey, what do you guys run? Whatever number he said, that's what we put in the car. Yeah, I've never claimed to be a dirt expert. I know the theory of it, but I don't have a lot of experience on it. So, yeah. This, though, is what you're also keeping in mind with your Ackerman. Ackerman is what helps cause this. So, Kyle starts 1/4 inch in dirt. Wasn't I building a dirt cabbie? The plan was there. Back when I had money, I was trying to buy one and couldn't do it. And so, yeah, we still will when I get around. So I'm building this car, pavement car. When I get to a point where I can build a dirt car, it will be an Ecotech powered car. So yeah, the yellow cabbie that I have from Stone Pros LLC, Kenny down there, that is a pavement car. We're going to keep that on the pavement. It's a little rusty underneath. I don't want to shock it with dirt. But so Doc, we might, the other neon that I've got, the stock based neon, we might take it to dirt some, but it's not going to be a dedicated dirt car. But we are going to build SCDRA rules style dirt car. It might be a year, might be 2 years at this point. It's all when the finances catch up. So if I get to 1,000 subscribers and we get 10,000 stars every time we go live, whoo, I'll build that thing next month. Not gonna happen, but I can dream. If it changes location of the ball joint, when it changes all the measurements, does it split the difference with the other side? No. So Michael, that only applies to toe. Okay. If you move your ball joint, okay, so if this is your control arm, right? If you move your ball joint and you make, so say this is the knuckle, okay? This is the length of the ball joint from here to here. If you make that longer, so your ball joint comes down here, you are changing the control arm angle, and you will change the difference between here, that and your tie rod, just because you're making that distance longer. If it changes toe when you do that, if your toe changes, then yes, that will be distributed evenly. However, it's only toe that does that, because if you have this control arm comes all the way down here, but the other side, you have your knuckle and your tie rod pulp is there, right? This doesn't change, right? That does not get distributed equally or anything like that. And toe in the rear doesn't do that because they're not connected and they don't move. So, yeah. What pavement track do you run? I run all over the place, Jimmy. My home track is Springport Speedway or Spartan/Corgan Oil Speedway. Those are where I started racing. I cut my teeth. But I have raced all the way down to Florida, the Freedom Factory, Bristol Motor Speedway, Angola, Kalamazoo, Galesburg, Bertrand, Owasso. I've ran, I think, 12 or 15 tracks. So we're looking to add to that this year. But I travel around a lot on pavement. So this year, I'll be actually running the 22nd. I'll be in a Honda for the first time, guys and gals. I will be driving Pete Doxey's car for the autism awareness race on the 22nd. That will be at Kalamazoo. That is my first race planned this year. So Hawkeye Downs. Nope, I've never ran Hawkeye Downs. I've not been to Hawkeye Downs. So which side rear to toe out? That depends on if you want the rear end to point to the outside or to the inside. So, because your rear toe, now I'm going to cover this very, very quickly. Go back and watch the second episode that we did that covered toe. Okay. But your rear tires are not connected, so you can adjust them independently. So if you adjust them like this, with this being your right rear, this being your left rear, when you go to the corner and you lift the left rear up, you put all that weight on the right rear, it is going to go in that direction. If you toe that tire in, it is going to go in that direction. So if you want to loosen the car up, you typically toe it out. If you want to tighten the rear of the car up, you typically toe it in a little bit. So quick, simple, easy. But we talk about that much more in detail with the toe episode. So yeah. I have not been to Onaway. I would like to try to get up to Onaway. So this year, the other track that I really want to get to is Rockford, since it is closing down. We're going to try to take Doc, my other car, down to Rockford. The car that I've always had, I could have ran the Midwest Traveling Series down there, but I'm going to try to get down there for the Bahama brackets this year with Doc. The cars that I've had have always been too fast. They break out. I'd have to run against the V8s, and I just don't want to do that. And I'm not a fan of trying to sandbag. So I don't want to like have to slow my car way down. That event is not for my car, and that's fine. I don't want to change the event. I just won't. I can't support it because I don't want to slow down. But now I have a slower car that I can support it. So we're gonna try to do that. So hey, good news! I'll be there on the 22nd because late models don't run again until the 29th of Shady Bowl. Awesome. We'll see you there, Chad. How far south are going? I will go as far south as I can. This year I'm trying to go west. We're trying to go to California as well, so I can go race at Madera Speedway. So, is there any more questions on bump steer or Ackerman? We'll try to get those out of the way. Like I said, if you Ackerman and bump steer are one of those things, I would honestly say probably 80 to 90% of racers, they have no need for that information. They don't need to check it. They don't need to know what it is. Like it's nothing you can change. It's nothing you're going to do to change it. It is just simply, it might be able to explain why the car is handling way better or way worse. If you don't see anything else that's changed, you might be able to check, oh, hey, bump steer got way better. Oh, hey, the Ackerman's way better. Like it's the story I told of, having that bent steering arm, that was my introduction to it. So it's probably nothing you're ever going to need. So, but it's just the more you know, the better you can be. So, something to keep in mind. A little off subject here. What days are shipping products? Order to receiver mounts. I know you're busy with a new job. Curtis, I'm trying to get all caught up, my guy. I sent a bunch of stuff out a day or two ago. I have stuff printing literally right now at home. Some stuff I thought I had in stock, and I didn't. So the goal is to have everything out, everything ready. My new job, I can't run to the post office myself, so I get stuff done at night, and my wife drops it off for me the next day. So the goal is to have everything Wednesday, so she can drop it off Friday or Thursday, because by the time I get home tonight, I'm going to bed. So, and then tomorrow I'm coming home and just working on that before bed. So that is the goal, is to have everything tomorrow all caught up. There's only a couple orders. So there was either colors that I thought I had in stock or stuff I had to make some slight changes to. So I don't know exactly why yours hasn't gone out yet, but it will. So up at the front wheel drive shop, up over there. I try not to talk too much about the front wheel drive shop when I have a couple orders that I got to get sent out. Just that way they don't get buried any farther behind. So Kyle, for sure, my guy. Got orange, yellow, and purple. Oh, I do remember. I had to order one of those colors, Curtis. I forget which color. But I remember that now because I was actually like, huh, they ordered multiple different colors. Most people order multiple of the same color. So, Kyle, I will get with you, man. I've had less time to answer messages, so we'll try to do that. So, all right, guys and gals, we're going to call this one for tonight. Thank you for tuning in, especially those of you over at YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. I know some of you guys really like going over there to be able to watch this later. It is much easier to find, so we are live over there as well. Thank you guys all for tuning in. If you haven't already, hit the like button for me. It is the only thing I ask that you do for me. We will be going live in the subscriber group. If you're on YouTube, we have a subscriber group over on Facebook. If you're on Facebook and you want to, it's $5 a month. I've been lacking a little bit in the last few weeks. I won't lie. I got a new job. But I got a couple ideas that I think we're going to have some fun with over the next few weeks. So, yeah, we're going to go live over there in like 2 minutes. So come join us if you want. Otherwise, we will see you guys on Thursday.